He laughed at the quiet woman in sweatpants, until she sent him crashing to the mat with one breathless move. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. The old warehouse smelled of sweat, stale air, and the faint, metallic tang of determination. Alara traced the rim of her chipped water bottle, her gaze fixed on the faded recruitment poster peeling from the concrete wall. Forge your strength, it declared, beneath a silhouetted figure executing a perfect high kick. This wasn't some gleaming, chrome-plated fitness palace advertised on social media. This was the Crucible, a legendary, no-frills combat training gym tucked away in the city's industrial underbelly, known for producing formidable fighters and even more formidable egos. At 32, Alara didn't look like she belonged. Her slight frame was clad in simple gray sweatpants and a well-worn t-shirt that had seen countless washes, its original color a distant memory. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, revealing a face that was more thoughtful than aggressive, with eyes that observed everything with a quiet intensity. She carried no expensive gear bag, just a small, unassuming canvas duffel that held a change of clothes, hand wraps, and a leather-bound journal filled with meticulous notes on biomechanics and combat theory, its pages softened with age and use. She'd come to the Crucible not to compete, not to prove anything to anyone but herself. After years away, dedicating her life to a different kind of discipline, a quieter path focused on healing and restoration in the remote mountains, an old restlessness had begun to stir. A need to reconnect with the raw, physical language of her youth, a language taught to her by a mentor who had valued precision and inner peace over brute force. That mentor, a reclusive master who had taken her in as a troubled teenager, had once told her, "The loudest opponent is often the most hollow. True power resides in stillness." Alara, in the calm eye of the storm. The memory brought a faint smile to her lips, a fleeting softness that quickly vanished as she took in the gym's harsh atmosphere. She knew this world. She had lived in a version of it long ago, a world that often mistook silence for weakness and slightness of build for an invitation to dominate. She wondered if you, watching this story unfold, have ever felt that sting of being underestimated, perhaps in a bustling city office in London or a small-town committee meeting in rural Ohio, or even on a sun-drenched campus in Sydney. That moment when someone looks right through you, or worse, looks down on you, simply because you don't fit their preconceived notion of what power or capability should look like. Alara had felt it more times than she could count, but she had also learned that such underestimation could be its own kind of shield, a cloak of invisibility that allowed her to observe, to learn, and to choose her moments. Today, she just wanted to train, to feel the familiar burn in her muscles, the rhythmic impact of her strikes against a heavy bag, to lose herself in the disciplined dance of combat. She didn't anticipate that her quiet presence would ripple through the Crucible's established hierarchy, or that her simple desire to train would set her on a collision course with its self-proclaimed king. She simply paid her day fee to the board attendant at the front desk, nodded curtly, and stepped onto the worn training mats, her old canvas sneakers making almost no sound, a ghost in a land of roaring lions. The air thickened with testosterone and the percussive symphony of fists meeting leather, grunts of exertion, and the clatter of weights. This was Rex's domain, and everyone knew it. The main training floor of the Crucible was dominated by a central sparring ring, its ropes scarred and stained. Surrounding it, heavy bags hung like silent sentinels, and the walls were lined with an arsenal of conditioning equipment. It was here, amidst the organized chaos, that Rex, the gym's head instructor and undefeated local champion, held court. Rex was a mountain of a man, easily 6'4", with a physique that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and then polished to a high sheen. His branded fight shorts were always the latest design, his custom gloves immaculate, and his voice, a booming baritone, was rarely quiet. He moved through the gym with an air of absolute ownership, his coterie of devoted students trailing in his wake like pilot fish. Alara had found a relatively secluded heavy bag in a far corner, away from the main thrum of activity. She began her warm-up with a series of slow, deliberate stretches, her movements fluid and economical, hinting at a deep, ingrained understanding of her own body. She was focused inward, oblivious, or perhaps simply indifferent to the curious glances that had already started to come her way. It was Rex who noticed her first, or rather, who was alerted to her presence by one of his sycophants, a wiry young man named Mikey, who seemed to derive his own sense of importance from orbiting Rex. "Hey, Rex," Mikey called out, nudging the champion, "check out the new talent." Or lack thereof. Rex paused his demonstration of a brutal knee strike, his gaze sweeping dismissively towards Alara. A smirk spread across his face. He sauntered over, his entourage following, their collective presence casting a sudden shadow over Alara's quiet corner. Well, what have we here?" Rex boomed, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked Alara up and down, lingering on her simple attire and slender build. "Lost, little one? The yoga studio is down the street, next to the juice bar." His students snickered. Alara finished her stretch, straightened, and met Rex's gaze calmly. "No, I'm not lost. I'm here to train." Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying no trace of intimidation. Rex's smirk widened. "Train? Honey, this is the Crucible. We forge warriors here, not whatever it is you do." He gestured vaguely at her. "You look like you might get blown away by the wind from a fast jab." More laughter, louder this time. Alara simply picked up her hand wraps and began to meticulously bind her knuckles. "I'm aware of the gym's reputation," she said, her focus on the task. "That's why I chose it." Rex exchanged an amused glance with Mikey. "She's got spirit, I'll give her that. Or maybe she just doesn't understand English." "Look, sweetheart," he leaned in, invading her personal space. "This isn't a place for hobbies. People get hurt here. Real hurt. Wouldn't want you to break a nail, or worse, mess up that pretty little face." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. Alara didn't flinch. She finished wrapping her second hand, the canvas pulling taut over her surprisingly strong-looking knuckles, knuckles that bore the faint, faded tracery of old scars if one looked closely enough. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her tone perfectly even, "but I'm capable of managing my own safety." Rex threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Capable? Oh, this is rich. Mikey, you hear that? She's capable." He turned back to Alara, his amusement hardening into something colder. "Tell you what, why don't you just stick to the cardio machines in the corner? Or, better yet, maybe you can fetch us some towels. That seems more your speed." He winked at his followers, who roared with approval. Alara simply slung her small duffel onto a nearby bench and turned to face the heavy bag, her back to Rex and his mocking chorus. She took a breath, centered herself, and then, with a quiet exhalation, delivered a single, perfectly placed side kick. The bag, all 150 pounds of it, shuddered violently, swinging much further than anyone might have expected from someone her size. The impact was a dull, solid thud that seemed to momentarily quiet the surrounding noise. Rex's laughter died in his throat. For a split second, his arrogant mask slipped, revealing a flicker of surprise, perhaps even grudging respect, before it was quickly replaced by renewed scorn. He clearly chalked it up to a lucky shot, a fluke. He wouldn't make the mistake of underestimating her skill again. Oh no. He would just find new, more inventive ways to ensure she understood she didn't belong. The first encounter had set the stage. Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her path through the Crucible would not be an easy one. The days that followed Alara's initial, quiet defiance at the heavy bag became a masterclass in subtle and not-so-subtle harassment, orchestrated primarily by Rex, but enthusiastically supported by his loyal disciples. It began with the equipment. The heavy bags Alara chose would suddenly develop loose chains or torn seams mid-session, forcing her to move. The jump ropes available to her would be frayed or too short. When she attempted to use the speed bag, Rex, or one of his crew, would invariably need the adjacent one, their movements overly aggressive, their stray elbows and shoulders accidentally encroaching on her space. Then came the verbal jabs, a constant undercurrent of mockery. Having fun with your little dance routine, princess? Rex would call out as Alara moved through complex footwork drills. Careful you don't trip over your own tiny feet. His students would echo him, their comments ranging from snide remarks about her delicate physique to outright suggestions that she was distracting the serious fighters. During group conditioning circuits, Rex, as the instructor, would single Alara out, assigning her modified exercises that were either laughably easy, designed to make her look out of place, or impossibly difficult for someone of her apparent strength, setting her up for public failure. "Come on, Grandma, pick up the pace," he'd shout, even though Alara was often keeping up with, or surpassing, many of the men in endurance, if not in raw power for specific lifts. She never complained, never rose to the bait. She simply adapted, modified, and endured, her expression unreadable. Her silence, her refusal to be visibly rattled, seemed to infuriate Rex even more. He could understand it. Everyone else in the gym either feared him or revered him. Alara did neither. She just existed, a quiet, persistent anomaly in his well-ordered kingdom of sweat and machismo. She'd find her locker tampered with, her water bottle emptied, her clean towel misplaced. When sparring sessions were announced, Rex would pointedly overlook her when assigning partners, or on the rare occasion he did acknowledge her, he'd pair her with the largest, most aggressive, and least controlled male student, always with a predatory grin and a "let's see what you're made of, sweetheart. Try not to cry." Alara would meet these challenges with the same quiet composure. She wouldn't win these spars in the conventional sense. She was often outweighed by 50 pounds or more, but she wouldn't be broken either. Her defense was impeccable, her movements evasive, her ability to absorb or deflect blows uncanny. She never landed knockout punches on these behemoths, but she frustrated them, made them miss, and occasionally, with a perfectly timed counter or a subtle shift in balance, made them look clumsy. Each time, she would emerge bruised but unbowed, offering a polite nod to her opponent before retreating to her corner, leaving Rex and his cronies muttering in disbelief and renewed irritation. What they didn't see were the late hours Alara spent after the gym had emptied or the early mornings before it opened, using the key her old mentor had given her to a private, almost forgotten dojo across town. A small, serene space filled with the scent of aged wood and incense. She honed her true skills. There, away from prying eyes, her movements transformed. The quiet observer from the crucible became a whirlwind of focused energy, her strikes precise and powerful, her forms flowing with a grace that belied their devastating potential. She moved like water, then like stone, her breath a silent metronome guiding the intricate choreography of a martial art that was both ancient and terrifyingly effective. She would revisit the lessons of Master Ishikawa, his voice a gentle echo in her mind. Strength is not just in the fist, Alara. It is in the breath, in the will, in the knowledge of when to yield and when to stand firm like the oldest mountain. The crucible was testing her patience, her resolve. The constant belittling, the exclusion, the attempts to intimidate. It was a familiar pattern, one she had hoped to leave behind. Yet, with each passing day, a different kind of resolve was hardening within her, not of anger, but of a quiet, unyielding determination. She wasn't there to fight them. She was there to train. But if they insisted on making it a battle, she would eventually have to remind them that even the quietest stream can carve through stone. The gym owner, a man named Sal, was an old-school boxing promoter who had transitioned into running the Crucible more as a legacy project than a thriving business. He was usually holed up in his cramped office, surrounded by yellowed fight posters and stacks of ledgers, emerging only to bark orders or collect dues. Sal had a gruff exterior, but was widely known to have a soft spot for Rex, whom he'd mentored from his early amateur days. He saw Rex as the gym's star attraction, the embodiment of its tough-as-nails reputation. When Alara, after a particularly egregious incident where Mikey had accidentally tripped her during footwork drills, causing her to sprain her wrist, decided to speak to Sal, she wasn't expecting much. She found him hunched over a pile of invoices, a half-eaten sandwich at his elbow. "Mr. Sal," she began quietly, "I need to talk to you about the training environment here." Sal grunted without looking up. "Problem with the equipment? Fill out a form." "It's not the equipment, sir. It's about the conduct of some of the other members, specifically Rex and his group." That got Sal's attention. He finally looked up, his eyes narrowed. "Rex? What about him? He's my top boy. Brings in half the students here." Alara recounted the pattern of harassment, the constant mockery, the subtle sabotage, and the recent tripping incident, showing him her swollen wrist. She spoke factually, without emotion, detailing the impact it was having on her ability to train effectively. Sal listened, his expression impassive. When she finished, he leaned back in his creaky chair and sighed. "Look, lady, what's your name again?" "Alara." "Right, Alara. Rex is, well, he's Rex. He's a champion. He's got a certain way about him. High energy, maybe a little rough around the edges. It's a fight gym, not a tea party. Boys will be boys, you know." Alara's eyes, usually so calm, held a flicker of something unreadable. "What happened today wasn't boys being boys, Mr. Sal. It was deliberate, and it resulted in an injury." Sal waved a dismissive hand. "Mikey probably didn't see you. You're kind of small, blend into the background. Rex runs tough classes. If you can't handle the heat, maybe this ain't the kitchen for you. There's a ladies' cardio kickboxing place over on Elm Street. Might be more your style." The dismissal was blatant, patronizing. Alara stood there for a moment, the silence stretching. She could see there was no point arguing. Sal's loyalty, or perhaps his financial dependence on Rex, was clear. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Sal," she said, her voice betraying no hint of the frustration simmering beneath the surface. She turned and left his office, the scent of stale cigar smoke and indifference clinging to her. The incident, and Sal's reaction, only emboldened Rex. He now saw Alara not just as an amusement, but as someone who had tried to go over his head, a challenge to his authority. The harassment intensified. Her training gear would mysteriously disappear, only to reappear in the lost and found, sometimes damaged. During sparring, Rex would accidentally step on her foot or miss a pad and clip her with a glove. His verbal taunts became more personal, more pointed. "Still here, huh? Guess you're a glutton for punishment. Or maybe you just like the attention, even if it's the wrong kind." Alara retreated further into herself, her public training sessions becoming models of stoic endurance. But her private sessions at Master Ishikawa's dojo intensified. She pushed herself harder, her movements becoming sharper, faster, more precise. She wasn't training for a fight. She was training for survival, for the preservation of her own spirit in the face of relentless negativity. She filled her journal with observations, not just of combat techniques, but of Rex's patterns, his tells, the subtle shifts in his weight before he launched an attack, the way his breath hitched when he was bluffing. She studied him like an opponent, even though she had no intention of ever formally facing him. Her old mentor had taught her that understanding an adversary was the first step to neutralizing their power, whether in a physical confrontation or a battle of wills. The Crucible was becoming less a place of training and more a landscape of psychological warfare. And Alara, the quiet woman in worn sneakers, was unknowingly preparing for a moment when all her hidden strength, all her discipline, would be called upon in the most unexpected way. She just hoped that when that moment came, she would remember not just the warrior, but also the healer she had tried so hard to become. The quiet dignity she fought to maintain was her truest armor. One sweltering afternoon, a buzz of excitement rippled through the Crucible. A renowned martial arts documentarian, famous for his gritty, unvarnished profiles of underground fight scenes and emerging champions, was visiting. He was reportedly looking for fresh talent, new stories, the next big thing. For Rex, this was a golden opportunity, a chance to showcase his skills, his gym, his dominance, to a potentially global audience. He preened, he postured, he barked orders with even more vigor than usual, ensuring his students looked sharp, that the gym was relatively clean, and that he, naturally, was the center of attention. The documentarian, a wiry man named Kenji Tanaka, with observant eyes and a quiet demeanor that ironically mirrored Alera's, moved through the gym with his small crew, filming sparring sessions, conditioning drills, and Rex's bombastic instructional segments. Alera, as usual, tried to remain inconspicuous, focusing on her solitary bag work in the corner. But Tanaka's camera, unlike Rex's attention, seemed drawn to the periphery, to the quiet moments, the unscripted realities. He filmed Alera for a few minutes. Her rhythmic, precise strikes a stark contrast to the often showy, less controlled movements of some of Rex's acolytes. Rex, noticing Tanaka's lens straying from its rightful subject, himself, decided to orchestrate a more compelling scene. "All right, folks, gather round," he bellowed, clapping his hands. "Time for a little demonstration of practical application. We need a volunteer. Someone help me show Mr. Tanaka here how we handle a real-world self-defense scenario." His eyes scanned the crowd of students, all of whom eagerly vied for his attention. Then, with a malicious glint, they landed on Alera. "How about you?" he said, pointing directly at her. "Our newest enthusiast. Come on up, Alera. Don't be shy. This will be educational for everyone, especially you." A wave of snickers went through the students. Mikey nudged his friend, whispering, "This is going to be epic. He's going to fold her like a pretzel." Alera paused her workout. She looked at Rex, then at Tanaka's camera, which was now firmly pointed in her direction. She knew what this was. A public humiliation, gift-wrapped for a documentary crew. Every instinct told her to decline, to walk away. But then she saw the expectant smirk on Rex's face, the eager anticipation in the eyes of his followers, the polite, almost clinical curiosity on Tanaka's. Something shifted within her. Maybe it was the culmination of weeks of enduring their scorn. Maybe it was the memory of her mentor's words about facing challenges head-on, not with aggression, but with centered truth. Or maybe she was just tired of being invisible, of being dismissed. "What kind of scenario did you have in mind, Rex?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Rex's grin widened. He clearly hadn't expected her to agree so readily. "Oh, something simple. Let's say an unarmed attacker, bigger, stronger." He puffed out his chest meaningfully, trying to, intimidate a smaller person. "How would you handle that, Alera? Show us your techniques." He practically oozed sarcasm. The circle of onlookers tightened. Phones emerged, discreetly recording. Sal, the gym owner, even materialized from his office, drawn by the commotion, a rare smile on his face, clearly anticipating a display of Rex's dominance that would look good on camera. Alera slowly walked towards the center of the mat where Rex stood, basking in the spotlight. She moved without fear, but also without bravado. She was simply there, present. As she approached, she subtly adjusted her stance, her weight distribution shifting, her breathing deepening almost imperceptibly. These were tiny adjustments, invisible to the untrained eye, but to someone who understood, they signaled a readiness, a coiling of energy. Tanaka zoomed in, his lens capturing the stark contrast. Rex, all bulging muscle and swaggering confidence, and Alera, slender, almost delicate in comparison, yet possessing an undeniable, if understated, poise. "Ready when you are, little bird," Rex purred, cracking his knuckles. "Try not to get hurt." The stage was set. The audience was rapt. And Alera, the quiet woman who just wanted to train, found herself in the center of a storm she hadn't sought, but one she was, perhaps, uniquely prepared to weather. The air in the crucible grew thick with anticipation. Rex flexed, playing to the crowd and Tanaka's camera, a caricature of aggressive masculinity. He clearly intended to make this quick, theatrical, and utterly humiliating for Alera. He'd probably execute a flamboyant, but ultimately harmless takedown, then patronizingly help her up, offering some condescending advice about the realities of real fighting. Alera, however, stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on Rex's center mass, not his taunting gaze. She breathed deeply, evenly, the way Master Ishikawa had taught her, finding her calm in the heart of the impending chaos. "All right, Mr. Tanaka," Rex announced, his voice booming for the microphone on the camera. "This is what happens when someone unprepared meets a determined aggressor. Pay attention, class. And you too, Alara. You might learn something." He lunged, not with full speed or power, but with enough force to knock an unsuspecting person off balance, his large hand reaching out to grab her shoulder in a mock display of control. It was meant to be an easy, almost dismissive maneuver. What happened next was so fast, so fluid, that many in the room would later struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. As Rex's hand shot out, Alara didn't retreat. Instead, she flowed. In a movement that seemed to defy physics for someone her size, she melted away from his grasp, not by stepping back, but by pivoting, using his own forward momentum as the engine for her response. Her left hand, almost faster than the eye could follow, didn't block his arm but guided it, redirecting his force harmlessly past her. Simultaneously, her right foot swept in a low, almost invisible arc, hooking behind Rex's leading ankle. It wasn't a kick, it was a precisely placed lever. As Rex's upper body, propelled by his lunge and Alara's subtle redirection, continued its forward trajectory, his compromised base could offer no support. His eyes widened in a comical O of surprise as he felt his balance utterly disintegrate. He wasn't pushed. He wasn't struck. He was simply undone. His massive frame, all 240 pounds of it, pitched forward and then down, not in a controlled fall, but in an awkward, flailing heap. He hit the mat with a resounding thud that echoed through the suddenly silent gym. The air whooshed out of his lungs in a surprised grunt. For a moment, he just lay there, stunned, the arrogant smirk wiped clean from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Alara stood calmly above him, not in a triumphant fighting stance, but simply standing, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing still even. She hadn't broken a sweat. She looked down at him, not with malice, not with triumph, but with a detached, almost clinical observation, as if he were a puzzle she had just solved. The silence in the crucible was absolute. The only sound was the whir of Tanaka's camera, which had captured every microsecond of the exchange. Mikey's jaw was slack. The other students were frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Sal, the gym owner, who had been grinning moments before, now looked as if he'd swallowed his cigar. This was not the demonstration anyone had expected, least of all Rex. The silence stretched, taut, and heavy. Rex, sprawled on the mat, pushed himself up onto his elbows, his face flushed a deep crimson, a mixture of fury and profound humiliation. He looked at Alara, then at the stunned faces around him, then at Tanaka's unwavering camera. Lucky shot, he stammered, his voice raspy, the earlier boom reduced to a deflated wheeze. Slipped on a wet spot. He tried to regain his composure, to salvage some shred of his shattered authority. Alara didn't respond to his excuse. She simply extended a hand towards him, a polite, almost indifferent gesture of assistance. "Are you all right, Rex?" she asked, her voice still quiet, betraying no hint of her victory. Rex slapped her hand away, scrambling to his feet with as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much. "I'm fine," he snarled. "Just surprised me, that's all. You got lucky. Beginner's luck." He turned to the crowd, attempting to rally them. "All right, folks, show's over. Back to training. Nothing to see here." But no one moved. All eyes were still on Alara, and on the undeniable fact that she had, with seemingly effortless grace, toppled their titan. Tanaka lowered his camera slightly, a thoughtful expression on his face. He stepped forward. "That was remarkable," he said, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. "Ms. Roberts," Alara supplied. "Alara Roberts." "Ms. Roberts," Tanaka continued. "That didn't look like luck to me. That looked like a highly refined technique. Where did you learn that particular redirection?" Before Alara could answer, Rex interjected, his voice regaining some of its bluster, though it now carried a brittle edge. "It was a fluke. I wasn't ready. She just caught me off balance. Anyone can get lucky once. He desperately needed to reassert his dominance, to erase the image of him lying helpless on the mat. "All right, Roberts," he said, turning back to Alara, his eyes narrowed. "You want to impress Mr. Tanaka? You want to show everyone you're not just some tourist? Let's go again. This time, no tricks, just skill, if you have any." He was publicly challenging her, trying to bait her into a more conventional, more brutal exchange where he believed his size and strength would inevitably prevail. He was betting she wouldn't dare, that her one lucky move was all she had. The students murmured, a new kind of excitement, tinged with apprehension, buzzing through them. They had seen the impossible happen once. Could it happen again? Sal, the gym owner, looked nervous. This was not good for business, not good for Rex's image. "Rex, maybe we should—" he began, but Rex waved him off. "Stay out of this, Sal. This is between me and Ms. Roberts." He spat her name like an insult. Alara looked at Rex, then at the eager faces around her, then back at Tanaka, whose camera was once again rolling. She could walk away. She had already made her point, albeit unintentionally. But she also saw the desperation in Rex's eyes, the desperate need to reclaim his status, to crush her and restore the old order. And she knew that if she backed down now, he would spin this, twist it, and her quiet life here would become even more unbearable. She took a slow breath. "All right, Rex," she said, her voice still calm, but with an undercurrent of something new, something that sounded like resolve. "If you insist. But let's be clear. This isn't about impressing anyone. This is about understanding." "Understanding what?" Rex sneered. "Understanding," Alara said, her gaze unwavering. The difference between force and power. The challenge was accepted. The second act was about to begin, and the stakes, for Rex at least, had just become impossibly high. The atmosphere in the crucible crackled with a nervous energy that was almost palpable. Rex, stung by his public felling, was now clearly out for blood. He shed his training top, revealing the rippling muscles beneath, a clear visual statement of his supposed superiority. He bounced on the balls of his feet, snorting like a bull, trying to intimidate Alara, to remind her, and everyone else, of the sheer physical disparity between them. Alara, in contrast, remained a picture of composure. She didn't remove any clothing, didn't adopt an aggressive stance. She simply stood, centered and still, her eyes watchful. Tanaka's crew repositioned, ensuring they had clear angles. This was no longer a casual demonstration. It was a genuine confrontation, an unsanctioned, high-stakes match. "No more games, Roberts," Rex growled, circling her. "This time, I'm coming for real." He clearly expected her to be intimidated, to show some sign of fear. When she didn't, his frustration visibly mounted. He launched his attack, a furious barrage of heavy, telegraphed punches and powerful but predictable kicks. He was relying on brute strength, on overwhelming her with sheer aggression. It was the strategy of a bully, not a technician. Alara moved like a phantom. She didn't meet his force head-on. That would have been foolish. Instead, she yielded, she flowed, she deflected. His powerful haymakers met empty air. His thunderous kicks grazed past her as she shifted, pivoted, used angles he didn't seem to comprehend. For every ounce of force he expended, she used a mere fraction in evasion and redirection. It was a masterclass in defensive movement, a beautiful, almost hypnotic dance of avoidance. The crowd was mesmerized. The snickers had long since died, replaced by gasps of disbelief. They were witnessing something they didn't understand. Rex, the invincible champion, was swinging at shadows, his face growing redder with exertion and fury. He was becoming increasingly wild, his technique deteriorating as his frustration grew. "Stand still and fight me, you coward!" he roared, lunging with a desperate, clumsy tackle. This was the moment Alara had been waiting for, the overextension, the loss of balance born from rage. As he careened towards her, she didn't step away. She stepped into him. In a movement that was breathtakingly swift and precise, she dropped her center of gravity, her hands shooting out to grip his oncoming arm and collar. Using his own reckless momentum, she executed a textbook Ippon Sui Nage, a one-arm shoulder throw. Rex, despite outweighing her by at least 80 pounds, was lifted, his feet leaving the ground, and then brought crashing down onto the mat with a force that seemed to shake the entire building. This time, there was no question of slip, no excuse of being caught off guard. He landed flat on his back, the air exploding from his lungs in a pained whoosh. The impact left him momentarily paralyzed, his eyes wide with shock and the dawning, horrifying realization of his own inadequacy. Alara stepped back, breathing easily, her expression still neutral. She hadn't even broken a sweat. The gym was utterly silent. Even Tanaka seemed to be holding his breath. Then, slowly, a single person began to clap. It was one of the quieter students, someone who had often been on the receiving end of Rex's taunts. Then another joined in, and another, until the entire gym, excluding Rex's stunned inner circle, erupted in a wave of spontaneous, astonished applause. Rex struggled to sit up, his face a mask of pain, humiliation, and disbelief. He looked at Alara, no longer with arrogance, but with a kind of terrified awe. Who are you?" he wheezed. Alara looked down at him, a flicker of something almost sad in her eyes. "I'm just someone who believes that true strength isn't about how hard you can hit," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush, "but about how well you can stand your ground without losing your center." She then turned to the assembled crowd, her gaze sweeping over them, and that sometimes the most powerful opponent is the one you underestimate the most. With that, she walked over to her duffel bag, picked it up, and calmly headed for the exit, leaving behind a gym full of stunned onlookers, a dethroned champion, and the indelible proof that appearances can be dangerously deceiving. The legend of the quiet woman at the Crucible had just begun. In the immediate aftermath of Alara's second, undeniable victory over Rex, an almost reverent hush fell over the Crucible. Rex himself remained on the mat for a long moment, not physically incapacitated, but mentally shattered. His aura of invincibility had been publicly and comprehensively dismantled. Mikey and his other cronies, who had been so quick to mock Alara, now stood awkwardly, avoiding eye contact with anyone, their loyalty to their fallen idol visibly shaken. Sal, the gym owner, rushed over to Rex, a look of genuine concern mixed with utter bewilderment on his face. "Rex, you okay? What happened? Did she do something illegal?" Rex just shook his head, still struggling to process the reality of his defeat. It was Tanaka, the documentarian, who broke the spell. He approached Alara as she was about to leave, his camera still discreetly recording, though his demeanor was now one of profound respect. "Ms. Roberts," he said, his voice earnest, "I've filmed fighters all over the world, champions, masters. I've rarely seen such economy of motion, such precise application of technique against a significantly larger opponent. You mentioned your name is Alara Roberts. Is there a story there? A school, a lineage?" Alara paused at the doorway, her hand on the handle. She considered his question. For years, she had guarded her past, the memories of Master Ishikawa, the rigorous, almost monastic training that had shaped her, the quiet life she had built away from the aggressive clamor of the martial arts world. She had come to the Crucible seeking anonymity, a simple return to the physical discipline she loved. "I had a good teacher," she said finally, her voice soft but clear. "He taught me that martial arts are not about aggression, but about balance. Not about ego, but about spirit." "And your teacher's name?" Tanaka pressed gently. Alara hesitated, then a faint, almost melancholic smile touched her lips. He preferred to remain uncelebrated, like the roots of a great tree, essential but unseen. She gave a slight nod. "Thank you for your interest, Mr. Tanaka, but I believe my training here is complete." And with that, she slipped out the door, leaving Tanaka with more questions than answers, and a gym full of people who were beginning to understand they had witnessed something truly extraordinary. The news of what had happened spread through the local martial arts community like wildfire. Tanaka's footage, though not immediately released, was already becoming the stuff of legend, whispered about in dojos and fight clubs across the city. The day Rex, the Crucible King, was floored by a little bird. Rex, for his part, was a changed man. The swagger was gone, replaced by a sullen, brooding silence. He stopped coming to the gym for several days. When he did return, he was quieter, more subdued. He still instructed, but the arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, bruised ego. Some of his students drifted away, disillusioned. Others, however, looked at him with a new, more critical eye, realizing that perhaps his dominance had been built more on intimidation than on truly superior skill. Alara did not return to the Crucible. She had achieved what she unknowingly set out to do, not to defeat Rex, but to affirm her own path, her own strength, on her own terms. She went back to her quiet life, to her work as a physical therapist specializing in rehabilitating athletes, a profession where her deep understanding of biomechanics and her gentle, patient demeanor were truly valued. She found solace in helping others heal, a counterpoint to the destructive potential of the arts she had mastered. Yet, the ripples of her brief appearance at the Crucible continued to spread. Sal, the gym owner, found himself facing a dilemma. The gym's reputation, once built on Rex's aggressive image, now felt tainted, almost fraudulent. Attendance had dipped. The atmosphere was somber. He realized, perhaps too late, that he had prioritized bluster over substance, image over integrity. He also realized he had grossly misjudged Alara. He'd seen her slight frame and quiet nature and dismissed her, just like everyone else. Now, he found himself replaying Tanaka's footage in his mind, marveling at her skill, her composure, her almost serene power. He knew he had to do something, not just for his gym, but for his own conscience. It took him a week to track Alara down, using the vague information Tanaka had managed to gather. He found her not in another gym, but at a small community garden, tending to a plot of herbs, her hands, those same hands that had so effortlessly dismantled Rex, now gently coaxing life from the soil. The contrast was not lost on him. Sal approached Alara tentatively as she knelt by her small plot of meticulously tended herbs, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the community garden. She looked up, her expression calm, unsurprised. "Mr. Salvatore," she said, wiping soil from her hands onto her simple work apron. Sal shifted uncomfortably, the usual bluster he employed in his gym, feeling entirely out of place here, amidst the quiet greenery and the scent of damp earth. "Ms. Roberts, Alara, I came to apologize." Alara straightened, her gaze direct but not unkind. "For what, specifically, Mr. Salvatore?" Sal swallowed. For how you were treated at my gym. By Rex, by the others. By me. I dismissed you. I didn't listen. I was wrong." He looked down at his expensive leather shoes, suddenly feeling foolish and out of his depth. "That footage Tanaka shot, it's something else. I've been in the fight game my whole life. I've never seen anything quite like it. That kind of skill, that control, it's rare." Alara nodded slowly. "My teacher believed that the art was a path to inner peace, not a tool for aggression. The skills are a consequence of that journey, not the goal." "Your teacher," Sal said, "must have been one hell of a man." He paused, then plunged ahead. "Look, Alara, the Crucible is not doing so good. Rex is, well, he's not the same. And the students, they saw what happened. They're confused. Some are leaving. The whole atmosphere is off. I was thinking, I know this is a long shot, but would you ever consider teaching? Maybe a workshop? Or even a regular class?" Alara looked at him, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "You want me to teach at the Crucible, Mr. Salvatore? The place where I was told I didn't belong, where I was advised to try the ladies' cardio kickboxing class." Sal winced. "Yeah, I know. I deserve that. But I'm serious. What you have, it's what the gym needs. Not just the skill, but the philosophy. That stuff you said about balance, about spirit. Maybe that's what's been missing." Alara considered his offer. Her life was quiet now, ordered. She had her work, her garden, her peace. Returning to a place like the Crucible, even in a different capacity, felt like stepping back into a storm. Yet, she also thought of Master Ishikawa, who had always stressed the importance of sharing true knowledge, of lighting a candle rather than cursing the darkness. "I'm not sure I'm what you're looking for, Mr. Salvatore," she said finally. "My way of teaching is very different from what your students are used to." "Different is good," Sal said quickly. "Different is what we need. Please just think about it. One workshop, maybe? See how it goes." Alara was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting over the rows of flourishing plants. Then she met Sal's eyes. "I will consider it," she said, "but on my terms. If I do this, it will be to teach discipline, respect, and control. Not aggression, not ego." Sal's face lit up with relief. "Anything you say, Alara. Anything. Just thank you for even thinking about it." As Sal walked away, a little lighter in his step, Alara returned to her herbs. The thought of teaching at the Crucible was unsettling, yet there was a part of her, the part that still carried Master Ishikawa's legacy, that felt a quiet pull. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could plant a different kind of seed in that barren ground. A few weeks later, a simple, handwritten notice appeared on the Crucible's bulletin board, amidst the glossy posters of snarling fighters. "Special workshop. The principles of centered combat. Instructor, Alara Roberts. Limited space." The response was hesitant at first, then curious. Some of Rex's former disciples signed up out of sheer disbelief. Others, who had watched Alara with quiet admiration, were eager to learn. Even Rex, humbled and searching, put his name on the list, much to everyone's surprise. The day of the workshop, the Crucible felt different. Quieter, more attentive. Alara stood in the center of the mat, not in worn sweats, but in simple, loose-fitting traditional training GI, the kind Master Ishikawa had worn. She began not with punches or kicks, but with breathing, with stillness. And as she spoke, her quiet voice filled the gym, not with commands, but with a wisdom that resonated far deeper than any shout ever could. The transformation of the Crucible, and of those within it, had begun, not with a bang, but with a breath. Alara's workshops at the Crucible became a quiet phenomenon. They weren't about flashy techniques or brutal sparring. Instead, she focused on the fundamentals: stance, balance, breath control, the seamless integration of mind and body. She taught her students to listen to their bodies, to their opponents, to the subtle energies of an encounter. She emphasized precision over power, deflection over direct confrontation, and inner calm over outward aggression. Many of Rex's former acolytes, initially skeptical, found themselves profoundly challenged. They were used to relying on brute strength and intimidation. Alara's methods required patience, introspection, and a willingness to unlearn bad habits. Some couldn't adapt and quietly dropped out, but many stayed, drawn by her undeniable skill and the quiet authority of her presence. They began to see that true martial prowess wasn't about looking tough or winning every exchange through force. It was about a deeper, more sustainable strength. Rex himself was a surprisingly dedicated student. Humbled by his public defeat, he approached Alara's teachings with a newfound openness. He struggled, his ingrained habits of aggression hard to break. But Alara was patient with him, as she was with all her students. She saw the flicker of genuine desire to learn beneath his battered ego. She never mentioned their previous confrontations, never lorded her victory over him. She simply taught, offering corrections with gentle precision. Her critiques focused on technique, never on character. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the culture of the Crucible began to shift. The aggressive posturing lessened. The constant, boisterous noise was punctuated by moments of quiet concentration. Students began to help each other, to share insights, to focus more on personal development than on dominating others. Sal watched the transformation with a sense of awe. His gym, once a bastion of raw, often mindless aggression, was becoming a place of genuine learning, of disciplined practice. And it was all thanks to the quiet woman he had once so readily dismissed. Tanaka, the documentarian, returned to the Crucible several months later, intrigued by the stories he'd heard. The film he eventually produced wasn't the expose of underground fight culture he had initially envisioned. Instead, it became a quiet, powerful meditation on the nature of true strength, centered around Alara Roberts and her unlikely journey. It didn't make her an international fight star. That was never her goal. But it did bring a new kind of recognition to her and to Master Ishikawa's forgotten teachings. It highlighted the idea that the most profound power often lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to build, to heal, to find balance. Alara never became the new Rex. She didn't seek to dominate or control. She simply shared her knowledge, her presence a constant reminder that strength and humility could coexist. That power didn't need to shout to be heard. Her impact was in the subtle shifts, in a way students carried themselves with more centeredness, in a respectful quiet that now often filled the training hall, in the dawning understanding that the greatest battles are often fought and won within oneself. And Rex? He never regained his former status as the gym's undisputed king, but he found something perhaps more valuable, a measure of humility and a genuine respect for an art that went far beyond his previous understanding. He even started assisting Alara in some of her beginner classes, his movements still powerful, but now tempered with a newfound control and a surprising gentleness. The story of Alara Roberts at the Crucible became a quiet legend in the martial arts community, a testament to the fact that true mastery isn't about the noise you make, but about the stillness you possess. It reminds us, wherever we are watching from, whether it's a bustling metropolis like Tokyo or a quiet village in the Swiss Alps, that underestimation is a common human failing, but the capacity for quiet strength, for profound and unexpected change, resides in us all. It prompts us to look beyond the surface, to listen more closely to the silences, for it is often there that the most powerful truths are found. If Alara's journey resonated with you, if you've ever witnessed someone defy expectations through quiet resilience, we'd love to hear about it. Share your stories and where you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of unexpected strength and everyday heroism. Until next time, remember that the most formidable power is often the one that whispers, not the one that roars.